All right, get ready because today we are taking a deep dive into some pretty profound stuff. We're talking about happiness, discomfort, and finding peace in the middle of all the craziness of life.
Sounds intense.
It is. You sent in this spoken essay from a spiritual teacher, and wow, this thing is full of insights that really turn conventional thinking on its head.
It really makes you question some of those assumptions we often carry around, about happiness and where it actually comes from.
Absolutely. So he starts off by laying out this fundamental truth. Life is a constant flow of experiences. Some are pleasurable.
Some are painful.
Exactly. It's kind of like riding a wave. You've got your peaks and your troughs.
And he gives some examples that are really easy to relate to, like, landing that dream job, definitely a peak experience.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But then there are those moments like your car suddenly breaking down and you miss a super important meeting, definitely a trough.
Ugh, I've been there. Talk about stressful.
Totally. But here's the main point. He keeps emphasizing neither the highs nor the lows actually define who we are at our core.
It's about detaching from those outcomes, right?
Exactly. Understanding that our true essence, who we really are, isn't dependent on what's happening around us.
That's where it starts to get really interesting. He argues that a lot of human suffering stems from this uncomfortableness with ourselves. We resist what's happening. We try to manipulate outcomes to avoid that feeling of discomfort.
And he suggests this resistance comes from mistaking those thoughts and feelings for who we really are. And we get free caught up in those stories we tell ourselves of who we are, what we need to be happy.
We lose sight of something deeper.
Exactly.
He gives this great example about financial stability. We often tell ourselves that achieving financial security is the key to lasting happiness, right? But what happens when we reach that goal?
Well, those deeper anxieties and fears, they might still be there, lurking beneath the surface.
Exactly. So it raises the question, if external achievements don't guarantee lasting happiness, where do we actually find it?
Good question.
That's where he introduces this concept of the spiritual heart. He describes it as this space of peace and stillness, a kind of sanctuary beyond the constant chatter of our minds.
It's about connecting with our true selves, that part of us that's untouched by all the ups and downs of life.
Okay, so how do we actually tap into this spiritual heart? Does he offer any practical advice?
He's a big advocate for practices like meditation and mindfulness. These practices are designed to help quiet the mind and create space for that inner stillness to emerge.
So it's like hitting pause on the mental whirlwind, just being present with what is.
Exactly. Cultivating awareness, discovering that wellspring of peace within, independent of what's happening around us.
Now, this is where things get really interesting. He challenges this whole idea of personal doership. He suggests most of our actions are driven by those deeply ingrained beliefs and conditioning.
Rather than conscious choice.
Right.
It's a powerful point. He argues that instead of blindly following those societal shoulds and should nots, we should strive to do what we feel like.
Hold on. Is he saying we should just throw caution to the wind and do whatever we want? That sounds a bit reckless, doesn't it?
I think he's making a point about becoming more aware of the motivations behind our actions. Questioning whether they're truly aligned with our inner selves or just driven by external pressures and expectations.
So it's more about peeling back the layers, getting to the core of why we do what we do.
Precisely. And he even shares this pretty radical story from his own life about quitting his job and the surprisingly positive outcomes that came after.
He actually walked away from his job. Wow, that takes a lot of guts.
It does?
What happened?
Well, it turns out that quitting actually opened up a whole new chapter for him, one that was far more aligned with his passions and aspirations.
It's like he's saying sometimes taking a leap of faith, even if it feels scary, can actually lead us to exactly where we need to be.
That's a great way to put it. And while his actions may not resonate with everyone, that underlying principle is universal. Aligning our actions with our true feelings rather than blindly following those societal rules, it can lead to a deeper sense of freedom.
And flow in life.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm starting to see where he's going with this. So what does he say about flow?
Well, he makes this important distinction between the flow of life, which includes all those experiences, the good and the bad, and a deeper kind of flow, one that emerges from aligning with our inner impulses.
So there's this surface level flow that's just the natural ebb and flow of life, and then there's this deeper, more intentional flow, the kind that comes from aligning with our true selves.
You got it. And he stresses listening to our biological needs, our intuition, and those practical realities.
He's not suggesting we should ignore our responsibilities or just blindly follow every whim, is he?
Not at all. He's advocating for a more conscious, integrated approach to decision-making, one that honors our inner compass and the realities of our lives.
All right, I'm with you. This whole concept is really intriguing. He's basically suggesting we surrender to the unfolding of life while also recognizing that we have an active role in shaping that unfolding.
Exactly. Finding that sweet spot between acceptance and action, allowing life to unfold naturally, while also making conscious choices that align with our deepest values.
It's a lot to process. He actually poses a really thought-provoking question to the listener, and I'd love to pass it along to you. Think about a recent decision you made. Did it align with what you truly felt like doing, or was it driven by those external pressures and expectations?
It's a great question to ask ourselves. What you discover might surprise you.
And while we're talking about challenging conventional thinking, this speaker, he doesn't shy away from one of the most taboo emotions out there, anger. He really goes deep into the nature of anger.
Yeah, he makes this crucial distinction between anger is a natural, biological response and the suffering that we tend to create around it.
It's such an insightful perspective, isn't it? Like he's saying even enlightened beings experience anger, but they don't get all caught up in those mental stories and judgments that we usually pile on top of it.
Right. It's not about suppressing it or pretending it's not there.
He actually says even enlightened beings get angry. That's kind of mind-blowing. So how is their experience of anger different?
Well, he uses this really vivid example. He talks about a time when he found himself yelling at his dogs near a barbed wire fence, of all places.
Oh, wow.
It's a perfect example of experiencing anger without adding all that extra suffering. The blame, the self-criticism, all that stuff.
So it's like anger in its purest form is just energy moving through us.
That's a great way to put it.
And it's our thoughts about it, the blame, the should have, all that mental chatter that turns it into something harmful.
Exactly. He's suggesting that if we can learn to just observe the anger, let it be present without getting all tangled up in those mental stories, we can actually experience anger without creating more suffering for ourselves or anyone else.
Okay, so if we're not supposed to suppress it or react with blame, what are we supposed to do with anger? It sounds like he's advocating for, like, a radical acceptance, even of our most challenging emotions.
It's definitely a shift in perspective. Instead of seeing anger as something to control or conquer, he suggests we see it as a natural part of the human experience, maybe even a necessary one.
It's like acknowledging the storm without getting swept away by the waves, right?
Perfect analogy. He emphasizes that the key is to become aware of the anger, allow it to be there, and then let it go without clinging to all the stories that usually come with it.
He also mentions the importance of apologizing if our anger has caused harm to others, but without all that guilt and regret that usually makes apologies so heavy.
Yeah, it's interesting. He's kind of separating the apology from the idea of personal responsibility. It's not about beating ourselves up for having felt anger, but acknowledging the impact of our actions and expressing remorse for any pain we might have caused.
He even goes so far as to say the apology itself is a happening, not something we consciously choose to do. It's like it flows naturally from a place of genuine understanding.
It's like he's saying, when we're truly aligned with our true nature, those acts of kindness just kind of flow out of us without us having to force it.
This whole idea of doership versus happening, it seems like a central theme in his teaching, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's a profound shift in perspective, and one we can really impact how we experience life. He's suggesting that by recognizing the impersonal nature of our thoughts and feelings and actions, we can free ourselves from so much suffering. All that stuff that comes from taking everything so personally.
It reminds me of that story he told about quitting his job. It seems like he reached a point where that internal conflict of staying in a job that didn't feel aligned anymore, it just became too much.
Exactly. And he was willing to face those potentially negative outcomes, because for him, prioritizing his inner peace was more important than trying to control what might happen externally. He was even prepared to live a simpler life in a caravan in the forest if things didn't go as planned.
Wow, he really went through that mental exercise, imagining all the different possibilities, the pleasant and unpleasant aspects of that scenario.
He did. And the fascinating thing is that his decision to trust his inner guidance, even though it seemed risky, it actually led him to a path that was way more fulfilling, more in alignment with who he really was.
It sounds like his business really took off after he quit his job, right? Even though he was working from home, setting his own hours, it's like his willingness to let go of that control, to follow his intuition, it actually opened up new possibilities that he never could have planned for.
You nailed it. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes taking that leap of faith, even when it's scary, it can lead us to exactly where we're meant to be.
But he's also being realistic. Things don't always work out perfectly, right?
Right, of course. He acknowledges that things could have gone differently. He could have been fired, ended up hating the caravan life, found himself stuck in an even worse job. But he was willing to accept those possibilities. Because for him, prioritizing that internal peace, it was more important than holding on to that illusion of control over external outcomes.
This is a perspective that really challenges how we usually think about success and happiness, doesn't it? He's not saying we should be careless or irresponsible, But that real fulfillment, it comes from aligning our actions with our values and being open to what happens as a result.
And it's important to remember that he's not saying we should just withdraw from the world or disregard the needs of others. He stresses the importance of considering those around us, especially when making choices that could affect them.
So it's not about imposing our will on others, but finding a way to honor our own needs while being mindful of the people around us. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. He uses the example of deciding whether to go on holiday with a friend. If he's not feeling a clear yes or no, he'll ask for time to think about it. He's willing to risk missing out on the trip, even if it means potentially disappointing his friend.
That's such a great example. It speaks to that idea of being honest with ourselves and with others about what we're really feeling, even if it's uncomfortable.
It's about clear, respectful communication, while also acknowledging that everyone has the right to make their own choices. It's a way of relating that honors both our individuality and our interconnectedness.
Wow, this deep dive is really making me rethink things. What I'm hearing is that true happiness, it's not about forcing things to go a certain way. It's about cultivating that awareness, accepting the flow of life, and acting from a place of inner alignment.
You said it perfectly. Letting go of that illusion of control, surrendering to how things unfold, while recognizing that we do play a part in shaping that unfolding through our choices and actions. It's this dynamic interplay between acceptance and engagement.
This whole idea of aligning with our inner truth, it can feel kind of counterintuitive, especially when it comes to our relationships. You'd think someone so focused on their own inner peace might become more self-centered, right?
He actually talks about that. He argues that being at peace with yourself actually makes you less likely to project your own stuff onto others. Your insecurities, your needs.
So it's not about swinging to the other extreme, becoming a recluse who ignores everyone else.
Not at all. It's about recognizing that your well-being and the well-being of others, they're connected. He uses this great example, deciding whether to go on vacation with a friend.
Okay, I'm curious. If he doesn't immediately feel a yes or a no about the trip, what does he do?
He says he asks for more time to decide. He's willing to risk disappointing his friend, even missing out on the trip if it ends up not feeling right. He'd rather be honest than force himself to go and potentially be miserable, which wouldn't be good for anyone.
It's about being authentic with yourself and with the people in your life, even when it's hard.
Exactly. It's not always easy, but he believes it leads to much deeper, more genuine connections.
This is really shifting my perspective. That whole idea of doing what you feel like, which initially sounded a bit selfish, it's starting to make more sense. It's like a path to a more authentic, fulfilling life.
He also dives into how guilt and judgment can keep us stuck in those unhealthy patterns. And he uses this example of smoking. This might sound a little crazy at first.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more.
So instead of, forcing yourself to quit cold turkey, he actually suggests allowing yourself to smoke without judgment.
Wait, really? That seems counterproductive.
I know, right? It sounds wild. But he believes that by letting go of the guilt, you might actually become more aware of what's underneath it all. What need is the smoking trying to fulfill?
Ah, so it's about addressing the root cause instead of just focusing on the symptom.
Exactly. And he says this approach, you can apply it to any habit or behavior you're struggling with. Overeating, procrastinating, people-pleasing, you name it. By becoming aware of those underlying motivations, that's where real change can happen.
This deep dive has been so thought-provoking. This whole concept of prioritizing inner peace and letting go of the need to control everything, it's like a whole new way of looking at life.
He emphasizes it's a journey, not a destination. We're constantly learning, growing, and refining our understanding of ourselves and the world around us.
He leaves us with this powerful question. Imagine yourself on your deathbed. Could you honestly look back and say, I lived my life doing exactly what I felt like doing?
It's not about being reckless or irresponsible. It's about aligning your actions with your deepest values, what truly matters to you, even when it's scary or goes against what other people expect.
It's not about being reckless or just indulging every whim. It's more about making choices that resonate with who we are at our core, what truly matters to us deep down.
Yeah. And remembering this journey isn't just about chasing pleasure and running from pain. It's about embracing the whole human experience, the messy parts too.
He talked about being present with the outcomes of our choices, even the ones that don't turn out the way we'd hoped, just noticing the impact of our actions, without judging ourselves or blaming anyone.
That's where the mindfulness practice comes in, that non-judgmental awareness of our thoughts, feelings, actions. It helps us learn and grow and make different choices next time. It's an ongoing process, right?
So not beating ourselves up when we make mistakes, but seeing those experiences as opportunities to learn and understand ourselves better.
Exactly. He even suggested that by letting go of the guilt, the judgment we often carry about certain habits, we might actually find those habits start to change on their own.
Okay, I have to ask about this. He used smoking as an example, didn't he?
He did. He said that by allowing ourselves to smoke without judgment, we might actually see more clearly what's driving that behavior. What's the underlying need? It's about addressing the root of the issue.
Instead of just the surface behavior?
Exactly, bringing awareness to those unconscious patterns. And he said this approach, it can apply to anything we're struggling with, really.
This whole conversation has been so eye-opening. It's like he's presenting this totally different way of being in the world, one that values inner peace and aligning with our true nature.
And he reminds us, this isn't something that happens overnight. It's a journey, a process of self-discovery that takes time, patience, and a whole lot of self-compassion. And maybe, just maybe, letting go of some of those ideas we have about how things should be.
That image he left us with, out our deathbeds, being able to say, I lived my life doing what I felt like doing. That's powerful.
It's about living in alignment with our truth, moment by moment, trusting that by doing so, we're actually creating a more fulfilling life, not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us.
This deep dive has given us so much to think about. I really encourage you to go back to the source material, let those ideas settle in, and see if maybe, just maybe, they might inspire a shift in your own life.
And remember, this journey, it's ongoing. There's always more to learn, more to experience. Embrace the mystery. Stay curious. Keep exploring. You never know what you might discover.